Notre Dame gets a legacy, but it's a Michigan legacy. So you talk about digging up history and getting one up on a major rival. We're talking Notre Dame football. We got Nick Shepkowski on the line from Irish Wire. You can join him right there to break down Notre Dame football as we head toward August camp. Nick, we appreciate you joining us.
Mark, appreciate the invitation as always.
So we had some discussions on the Michigan side here in the last couple of days surrounding around, okay, was this taken for granted? So if you're not aware, folks out there, Lloyd Carr won a national championship at Michigan. So there are legacies and then there are
Let me
legacies.
step in, Mark. Half a national championship. Don't Scott Frost, Tom Osborne, what happened at Nebraska in 1997. That's half a national championship.
That is technically correct. So Ohio State fans, Notre Dame fans, whoever hates Michigan, Michigan State fans are always going to point that out.
Big Ten that's not in Ann Arbor, yes.
It's a half a national championship. And then you got to go back to like 1948. But I don't think we're here to pile on Michigan, but I did start it, didn't I?
That's why I signed on. Okay, I guess we can talk Notre Dame too.
Little Notre Dame, a lot of Michigan bashing. Okay. So Lloyd Carr, yes. So this is the last guy that got it done or half got it done for the Wolverines. And you're talking about his grandson. So I think a lot of Michigan fans were hoping and believing that the commitment would go their way. But CJ Carr, paving his own path, has chosen the Irish.
Yeah. I just remember when the offer first came out last year. And you see, okay, CJ Carr, highly sought after, especially after he had a very, very good sophomore year, was in the middle of that when the offer came out last year and thought, well, that's cute. His last name's Carr. It's cool that Notre Dame's making an offer. This guy is going to be maize and blue through and through. There's not a chance he goes anywhere else, is there? Then this started gaining steam a little bit and started to kind of wonder, well, maybe there is a little bit of a chance here. Maybe he's not Ann Arbor bound after all. And then really, this came to be real fast. Notre Dame hosted one of their camps last weekend. He threw again in front of Marcus Freeman, in front of Tommy Reese, the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Notre Dame. Whatever conversations they had obviously went really well. Kind of got wind that the weekend went extremely well, and then saw that on Monday he announced, all right, well, Thursday I'm announcing my commitment. And it wasn't hard to kind of put two and two together with that. It was surprising, especially kind of going in, just thinking back to it's Lloyd Carr's grandson. It's a Michigan family. His father was a quarterback at Michigan. Like, there's way too much lining up here in order for it not to be Michigan that ends up being CJ Carr. But at the end of the day, he ends up choosing Notre Dame. And now Notre Dame, although it's not in the 2023 class, they have a 5-star quarterback of the future. And that's only going to help with offensive recruiting, or at least should only help with offensive recruiting, not just for the 24 class, but for the 23 class as well. And really have a nice way paved out there at the quarterback position, regardless of what happens in this year's recruiting class as well.
And that is the big boost, isn't it? It's not just locking up that player, but then you're proving to other recruits, hey, this is a destination. This is, proof of concept. If somebody trusts in us, then you should trust in us as well. Brian Kelly had certainly upgraded recruiting over the back half of his tenure at Notre Dame. Now Marcus Freeman with a #1 recruiting class, and we've got a long, long way to go, of course. Do you see a difference in maybe even stepping it up another notch under Marcus Freeman?
Yeah, it's crazy because you would look at it and you would say that Charlie Weiss did a lot of things poorly at Notre Dame. Recruiting offensive talent wasn't one of them. Now, defensive talent didn't always rise to meet that. There's some stars that you can remember and probably name. Harrison Smith is probably the first one that comes to mind, at least NFL career-wise. Off of that, Weiss was responsible for recruiting successfully Manti Te'o to Notre Dame. It's not that he didn't have all of it defensively, but it just was a lot more scattered. And Brian Kelly upped that regularly. And you saw a rise not just with offensive skill players like the Golden Tates and Michael Floyds, but you saw that across the board, really. A lot more depth, offensive line-wise depth under Kelly. That was developed. Tight end position went from being a very good spot to, I don't think it's much of an argument, but in terms of what they put out in the NFL year after year after year, tight ends are as good as anyone's in the country on an annual basis. That rose under Kelly. But where you didn't see it was you didn't get that hot prospect quarterback. You always got kind of that second tier guy. And that really played out, especially when Notre Dame got to these bigger games, whether it was Everett Golson against Alabama in the national championship back in 2012, 2018, when you look at Trevor Lawrence on one side for Clemson, and Ian Book, God bless him, did just about everything he could with what God gave his abilities to be. But there was a difference there. There was a difference when you looked at Mac Jones for Alabama in 2020 in the college football playoff, and you had Ian Book again, even a veteran Ian Book at that point. So there's a difference there. And when you look at closing the gap, and that's been such a conversation really since things turned for Notre Dame under Kelly in 2017, was, okay, getting close, but how do you close that gap? How do you bridge things for between the Irish and the truly elites? Quarterback was always the starting point with that. This at least lays the possibility of going from pretty good. I don't think anyone's going to complain about Ian Book. The future with Tyler Buckner, I think people have pretty high expectations for him. This kind of leads the way to, okay, your expectation down the road can be great from that position, not just pretty good.
Got Nick Shepkowski on the line. The destination is Irish Wire. Check out his work right there and the rest of the staff at Irish Wire, tracking Notre Dame, and a significant recruiting haul already. #1 in the country, and the latest gem, of course, CJ Carr, top 5 quarterback out of the state of Michigan. So big recruiting weekend coming up, of course, this weekend. Nick, what are some of those stories and narratives that are out there that Notre Dame fans are looking for?
Well, one of the big things this weekend is a little bit shoring things up. Notre Dame's biggest or highest rated recruit this year, at least commitment in the 2023 class, the defensive end Keon Keeley out of Florida. He was actually the first player to commit to the 2023 class for Notre Dame and Brian Kelly at the time. And he's still been very strong in his verbal, but just, how it is this day and age. You can never just take a verbal commitment for being a verbal commitment. It's all right, you still have work to do, and that's still believed to be the case, as Keeley's taken visits to Florida recently. Alabama's lined up for him. I mean, a bunch of the powerhouses are still in pursuit of him, so making sure everything is good on those fronts. Then you're looking at a 5-star safety, Caleb Downs. Notre Dame has, obviously, Kyle Hamilton just went to the NFL draft. They bring in Brandon Joseph, who's one of the top safeties in the country, as a transfer from Northwestern. But what's the future of that position? How do you keep that at a high level? Caleb Downs would go a long way in doing that. A couple other players, some 4-star prospects from most outlets. Linebacker Jaden Osbury, offensive tackle Monroe Freeling is there this weekend. Receiver's been a huge position of need for Notre Dame. Chesney Stuckney, the old Clemson star, has taken over as a wide receivers coach. Rico Flores Jr. is there on campus this weekend, as is a cornerback and a defensive lineman, I believe. So, I'm not saying that, yep, they're gonna lock things up and bring in every one of these guys, but if they can secure Keeley and make sure that he stays committed to Notre Dame and doesn't really test the waters of what else is out there, and you can lock out maybe a player or two that's here on campus this weekend, I mean, this is already the basis of a really good class. And take a big step in making sure that it stays in the top 5 by the time things are all said and done next January or February.
Talking about Notre Dame football here at the Voice of College Football, please hit that like button. If you enjoy the content, others will as well. So consider sharing it out on social media as well. We got Nick Shepkowski on the line, Irish Wire. That's your destination to track Nick. And you see the Twitter handles there as well. You know what else came out here in the last couple of days, Nick, were over-unders coming out of Vegas, and Notre Dame at 9.5. How did that number hit you?
It's right on the money. I mean, you look at it, I think most people look and say, be a sizable underdog at Ohio State. Ohio State's offense is as good as there is in the country. Notre Dame should have a really good defense, but it's a different animal trying to go to Ohio Stadium on opening night, first regular season game for a head coach. It just so happens to be, oh, that's where you played college ball as well. So it's going to be as ridiculous as atmosphere as you're going to find, especially for two teams that are so close in actual distance that they don't play each other outside of the Fiesta Bowl a couple of times here recently, and a couple of home and homes in history. I mean, you're talking 6 times that teams from a couple hundred miles away have actually met for traditional powerhouses that both Ohio State and Notre Dame are. So that's going to be, I think most people look and say that's likely a loss. Then you have a few other very big games that stick out on the schedule. Clemson, the biggest home game of this year, first weekend in November. Regular season ends then as well, Thanksgiving weekend at USC. So those three are the ones that stick out, but there's a couple of tough ones in there as well. BYU should be a really solid team yet again, and that's the annual Shamrock Series game being played out in Las Vegas this year. That's no cakewalk. That one could jump up and get you. So those are the four that really stick out. And it turns up being, can Notre Dame go 2-2 against that, or can they, or better, or is it one where they likely lose three of those? I think where a lot of Notre Dame fans, there were frustrations with Brian Kelly of he had taken Notre Dame as far as it could possibly go, and that's under Brian Kelly. I think that's a fair discussion point, or a fair point to be made. What Brian Kelly did great was go look at his resume, go look at his win-losses since really 2018. He won every game he was supposed to win. He went into those games against the Virginia Techs and some of the middle-tier ACC teams, and it might not have been the prettiest of things. It might not have been anything that you frame and celebrate over, but at the end of the day, it was a victory. And he didn't get upset by teams you're supposed to get upset to. Can Marcus Freeman do that? Can a new head coach do that in his first year? I think is a big time question that goes into this. And so I think that 9.5 makes plenty of sense. Even if you go 2-1, you win the home game against Clemson or you win the road game against USC, is BYU going to be one of those teams that gets you? Is there going to be another one of those games as well along the way? A trip to North Carolina? Is there going to be one of those that jumps up and gets a first-year head coach or a rookie head coach that maybe a guy in that position like Kelly or that has a bunch more experience would be able to avoid? So I think that's a 9.5's right there. I tend to think when I went through it myself, I think that Notre Dame loses to Ohio State. Off the top of my head, I think they split USC and Clemson. And I think that there's one of those games in there, whatever it might be, that some weird hiccup happens. And I'm not going to put it out on Marcus Freeman and think that, yep, he's going to be a failure or unsuccessful. I would lean very slightly the under, but 9.5 seems perfect spot for it for me.
Yeah, I am right there with you in terms of the lean, but it's not something that I would advise anyone to play by any stretch of the imagination, because even coming out of the gate against Ohio State, and Nick, we do a lot of live shows here, receive a lot of fan feedback. It seems as though, obviously, on the Ohio State side, they are pure, like, we're going to win this game by 4 touchdowns. The Notre Dame faithful are more in the, hey, we've got a shot. We got a good team. We're going to go in there. I think it's going to be a really good game. We've got a good shot. Then you've got your standard college football fan that roots for other teams that I think they also think it's a given that Ohio State's going to win. Ohio State had a similar matchup against Oregon from a point spread standpoint, a similar matchup as a 14 to 15 point favorite. They lost the game at home. I know a different set of circumstances. CJ Stroud has a remarkable year under his belt as opposed to being a first-year, second-game starter and so forth. But still, Ohio State's going to be putting together a very talented defense, but a first audition, first go at it live under Jim Knowles, new defensive coordinator, defense that wasn't good last year. Again, plenty of talent, not good, though, on the field. So I'm not discounting this Notre Dame team coming in and possibly upsetting Ohio State.
Yeah, I don't think it's egregious to think. Like when I saw on College Game Day, the day of the NFL draft, when they had both Ryan Day and Marcus Freeman there, and Marcus Freeman was kind of joking like, okay, yeah, 13, make it 14. And then later at an alumni event that he spoke at, he's talking, yeah, I want no one in the country believing in us. I want our team to be the only people in the country that believe we have a chance. Make the point spread 17. Make it 20. Make it 21. I don't care. As long as the people in my room believe we're going to win, we're going to go out there and we're going to put on one heck of a show and make it compelling as heck, not just for part of the first half, but deep into that thing and maybe pull an upset. And that's the mindset that really you kind of need with it. I look at this Ohio State game, and just the difference in quarterback play. And I know we touched on that a little bit of what bringing in Carr is going to mean for Notre Dame. Tyler Buchner was a pretty big, one of the bigger recruits quarterback-wise Notre Dame that Brian Kelly did bring in. And I don't want to say problem because it's not his fault. He dealt with just pretty much everything that could go wrong in terms of getting game reps in high school going wrong. Sophomore year, Suffered an ACL injury. Junior year, puts up ridiculous numbers, almost wins a state championship in California as a quarterback. Senior year, goes out and COVID happens and he enrolls early, so he doesn't have a senior year of high school. Last year, played in a kind of a specialty role where I think it was 68% of the time he was on the field, it was a run play called by Notre Dame. Now he's a multiverse quarterback, and that's part of his strengths, is his ability to move and his ability to run. But it wasn't really a fair shot at running the actual offense of everything kind of being out there playbook-wise for him. So it being his first start and its first really game in control of an offense, not his first reps necessarily, and it coming at Ohio State, that probably does Notre Dame no favors either. So I'm a little bit hesitant to give Notre Dame too great a chances, just because of, okay, Ohio State's defense, it has question marks. It has issues that are there seemingly from a year ago. But Notre Dame's offense, I think, it's going to be a work in progress as the year goes on.
Nick Shipkowski talking up Notre Dame on the aftermath of CJ Carr, of course, committing to the Irish. Got to hold on to that commitment until December. Nick, we appreciate you stopping by, breaking down Notre Dame football for us.
Anytime, Mark. Appreciate it as always.